Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the greatest recordings ever. And I need to ask you a question, a sincere question. Have you listened to the Francisco Mignoni piano concerto that I talked about in a video earlier this morning? Oh my God, on SOM, S-O-M-M Records with Clelia, what was her name? I have her right here. Clelia Iruzun. There you go. Here it is. If you haven't, listen to it. If you like the Prokofiev piano concertos, you're going to love this. I need to mention it here because, quite frankly, most of you aren't going to watch that video because you're not going to care because it's unusual repertoire. Whereas Bruckner 7th is Bruckner, the 7th Symphony. Yay! Oh, Bruckner, big damn deal. So go listen to the Mignone, M-I-G-N-O-G-N-E, right? Is that how I spelled it? Yes, no. M-I-G-N-O-N-E, Mignon. That's him right there. Go listen to that. There's plenty of time for Bruckner. Anyway, we're talking about the greatest recordings ever. Yes, big deal, right? Bruckner and the 7th Symphony. Probably, it's the one that really turned people on to Bruckner. I mean, nowadays, the 4th is kind of the most popular because it has a subtitle, The Romantic. But in Bruckner's day, this was the one that made his reputation. And it really is a gorgeous work. But like all Bruckner symphonies, it's deceptive. It's deceptive because, first of all, structurally, it's a little bit odd. And because it is the calmest, biggest piece of music you've ever heard in your life. I mean, it's not without tension, but it's happening like in slow motion for almost the entire symphony. It really exists. It functions in 3 big parts, even though it's in 4 movements. You've got a first movement, which is like 20 some odd minutes long. It's like a slow movement, really. And then you've got the slow movement, which is like a slow movement, really, which is even longer. And then you've got a scherzo and finale, which are quite short, about 10 minutes each. And so collectively, they counterbalance the weight of the first movement. And if you think about it that way, I think that's a very helpful way to approach the work, because then you've got the balance of the structure already in your head, and it'll play out, more or less the way you expect it to play out. It's also a bit of a controversial piece because of the climax of the slow movement, where there is the option to use cymbals in triangle and timpani, which there was a later notation on the score that says not valid, and no one's sure whether Bruckner wrote it or whether that was added by Nickisch or someone else, the first conductor of the piece, back in the 1880s. I think you should always use the percussion. Why? Because they work. Because it's a wonderful thing, and because Bruckner sort of ratified it ex post facto by using percussion in a similar place in the Adagio of the 8th Symphony. So we know he wasn't averse to it. Not only did he do it in the 8th, but he used it like constantly. I crash and he crashed and he crashed and he crashed, and then he revised it and left only 2 big crashes in the 8th Symphony. And he also used a big cymbal crash in his cantata Helgoland. So he got cymbal crashes. What I think is actually inauthentic in the Adagio, and it's kind of interesting, is the timpani part. Because the timpani part, comes in where it should with a nice big long roll, and then it does these tonic and dominant things. Dun, 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 boom, boom, da, da, boom, boom, like that. Bruckner, I don't think, would have done that. Bruckner would have had one long tonic roll, stopped it where it stops, and that would have been it. That's Bruckner's typical handling of the timpani. So I don't know. Maybe it was a combination of factors. People don't really go into the details about that particular moment and with the excruciating pernicketiness that I, as a percussionist, for example, would like to do it. So in any case, it should be there. I don't care. It should be there. And the greatest recording ever, hands down, not hands down, but one of them. There are a whole batch of greatest recordings ever of Bruckner's 7th Symphony. But this one, Jochum and the Staatskapelle Dresden on Warner. Ooh, yeek. Sorry about that. I have 2 of them here. There we go. This is the Brilliant Classics licensed reissue of the same set. This is the Warner Basic. Hi, Mildred. I scared her. This is the Warner version. So they're the same things, exactly the same things. The Staatskapelle Dresden was, I think, the great German orchestra of the second half of the 20th century. I like them better than Berlin. I've said this a billion times because I like the way that they play better. I like the undifferentiated textures. It's more like a Central European orchestra, like the Czech Philharmonic, where you have woodwinds and strings, which are wonderfully warm and rich where they want to be, but also transparent and brass that's well differentiated in character. That is, the trumpets don't sound like the trombones, which don't sound like the horns, which you really need in Bruckner. You really, really want that in Bruckner because he's so brass heavy, and he gives so much wonderful thematic material to the brass section, and the climaxes all depend on them and layering the texture. So you want to hear those layers build up properly, unlike, Karajan and the Berlin Philharmonic, where it's all one glutinous mess, sort of compacted together. So I love this orchestra. They're beautifully recorded by the East German engineers, at least for the seventh. Their performance in this cycle of the eighth wasn't as good sonically, but the seventh is gorgeous. Some people have complained about the playing of the brass section, saying that they are not intonationally pitch perfect, and that is sheer snobbery, quite frankly. There is a tradition today, especially today, with modern brass players. They are so good, they are so talented, and they've got pitch accuracy whipped into them, flogged into them at the conservatoires where they hang out. And so it's very easy to go back to hear, mid 20th century brass sections, which had more vibrato quite often to their sound, and which had very, they weren't off key or out of tune in an offensive way, but they had that character, that timbre that didn't blend as much. And one of the reasons it didn't blend as much, quite probably, was that their sense of pitch was not as laser focused as it is now, as often as not. But that's no reason to take them to task, because these were some of the best players in the world in their day. And great playing is great playing, because not only did they have sonority that was characteristic, but they had style, they had phrasing, they had all of the other qualities that you want and that make these performances exciting. This particular performance has a spiritual, uplifting intensity, which is amazing. And it's projected through that adagio, that unbelievable adagio, which is it's incomparable in this performance. It's really, really exceptional. But also in the last two movements, which are the toughest ones to carry off, because after that, the rest of it is going to sound anticlimactic. I mean, the problem, as I said, in the structure, the big structure of Bruckner's Seventh, is that the coda of the first movement is so glorious that the ending's got to be a letdown. I mean, it's a light, short movement, light for Bruckner, dancing elephants, as we used to say. But it can be quite flat-footed if it's not lively enough, and the very ending recalls the ending of the first movement, only not as glorious, and it just isn't. But once you get, like I said, the sort of scherzo finale combo in your head, it will help you, because most classical symphonies, including those by Beethoven and even those by Brahms, other than his first symphony, are not finale symphonies. The classical ideal of the symphony was that the first movement is the biggest, and then the piece gets lighter as it goes. It was only when Beethoven did the fifth, and he had this sort of concept of this triumph, tragedy to triumph narrative that the music follows. And Romantic composers picked all that up, and they just did everything like that, sort of witlessly, without thinking about it. And as a result of that, you expect the finale to be like the biggest thing, with the biggest climax and the most satisfying, powerful ending, because you've overcome all of that, tragedy and struggle and striving and strife and all the S words. And so you can go crazy in the finale. Well, Bruckner's Seventh doesn't do that. You have to let it do what it does, because there is no strife or tragedy or anything in this symphony. There is that glowing first movement that, yes, it has some pensive moments and some forbidding climaxes. It does. And then you've got the gorgeous Adagio, which also begins in utter darkness and has a coda, which was supposed to be a funeral dirge on the death of Wagner. So yes, it has some sad music, but it's not music of anxiety or angst or struggle or overcoming, because Bruckner had nothing to overcome. He was already there, he really was. And maybe in the eighth and ninth he got more into the tourist part of romantic music, but the seventh, everything is all settled before you even begin. And so the scherzo and the finale are just there to please and to be appropriate, to finish the work in an apt and convincing way. So doing the finale is hard. It's hard to capture that balance of lightness and strength that's going to make sense when you get to the end of the symphony. And Jochum does that extremely well too. So we're in very, very, very good shape with this, one of the greatest recordings ever, for sure. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.